Hi, I'm Nairi, and in today's tutorial I'll be painting this super cute fairy who's wishing upon a star. This is using watercolor paint and it's part of a series of tutorials that I've done, so if you'd like to watch any of my other watercolor tutorials, you can click on the links in the description below. Also, if you'd like to paint these greeting cards with me and access free downloads of my designs, you can get them from my website. So again, I'll include a link to that in the description below. So you just need to visit my website, you can download them all for free, print them out and paint along with me. And if you don't have watercolor paint, but you'd still like to make a really cute greeting card for someone, print them out and color them in however you like with whatever you have. To help you navigate this tutorial, I've included timestamps below, so you can jump to whatever part of the video you need. And if I'm going too fast, just hit pause and take your time. In this video, I'm going to be going through what colors I use, how to mix the colors, and all the techniques used to create this beautiful greeting card. We'll be using some masking tape, some masking fluid, wet on wet technique, and also introducing the mixing of some new skin tones. So I hope you enjoy this tutorial. I think greeting cards are a great way to learn how to paint in watercolor because they're quick, easy, fun, and you get to practice all the techniques that you'd use in a big painting. So I hope you enjoy this. First, I'm going to quickly talk through the materials that we're going to use to create this fairy greeting card. I like to use the Schmincke Aquadrop watercolor paints, but whatever you have is absolutely fine. We'll also be using in this one a delicate washi masking tape, and that's just to tape off the edges so we get a really nice clean finish. And we'll be using some art masking fluid, and I like to use a rubber cement pickup to remove it. So you also need an old paintbrush for that, otherwise just a palette, 2 water baths, one to wash your brush and one for clean water to dilute your colours. I also use a small swatch of the paper that I'm painting on to do tests of my colours before I put them onto the painting, and also just paper towels to dry off my brushes and sometimes to remove mistakes. So let's get started. I'll talk you through the colours that I'm using first. So we've got cyan blue, amethyst violet, this is indigo blue, magenta, burnt umber, vermilion red and brilliant orange. We've got Indian yellow, that's ruby red, and a deep black. So those are the colours that I'm going to be using today. You can use whatever colours you like. And for what we're going to do first is we're going to apply the masking tape around the edges of the picture. This one is Tape Spec Nitto tape. It's a delicate 12mm, so it's 12mm wide, masking tape for painting. So to apply it, so it's pretty simple, you just tear off pieces and then we're going to place it. So I like to line up one edge with the edge of the paper and then just place it down like that and tape it down. Normally I would fold it under the paper, but actually we don't need to. So again, another piece for the top and just press it down with your fingers. The main edge to press it along is that the edge closest to the painting, because that's where the water will be sitting. So I just use the ends of my fingers, I don't use my fingernails or anything like that. And then we'll do it both down the long sides. Now the one area that you might want to just gently use your fingernail is where these two pieces of tape join. So just gently with your fingernail so you don't damage your paper. It's just press down there so that no water can get underneath. And if you use a 12mm, that's what mine is, a 12mm width tape, then this design will mean you've got full clearance around the whole picture. So I've designed it to work with that. So that's it, that's how you put your tape on, and what that will do is the watercolor paint won't travel underneath it, and so you'll have a nice white border to your picture when you finish, because what we're going to do is a lot of wet on wet technique, so it won't be a white background, we'll have a full sky background, and this will create a nice border. The next thing I'm going to do is put on some art masking fluid just to preserve the areas of the painting that I want to stay white. Okay, this is quite a gummy, kind of gunky stuff. So you want to use a really old brush. And what we want to do, the main areas that I want to preserve here are the stars. So I'm just going to paint this onto the stars. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is use just a cheap, stiff old brush, and then I'm going to flick it on, just so you just pull the strands of the brush up, and then release them, and it flicks, and it will make little flicks all over it, which will be great for other stars in the constellation. And they can be varying sizes. I do it mostly around that top area, and you can do a few others if you want. Then what you want to do is go and wash your brushes off straight away, and then wait for the masking fluid to dry. Normally I'd use a hairdryer to dry my watercolor paint when it's not drying fast enough for me, but I don't recommend using a hairdryer when you're using an art masking fluid. The more you heat it, the harder it is to remove from the paper. So just let it dry naturally. You just have to be patient for this stage. If you try to paint on this painting before the art masking fluid is fully dry, what happens is your paint will actually go underneath it, so it won't seal it off properly and preserve those white areas. So you do need to wait. While we're waiting, why don't we mix up? So really the main colour, the only colour we're really going to mix in this is a skin tone. Now in the previous fairies I've done a Caucasian skin tone, and this one I'm going to do like a Maori Pacific skin tone. There's lots of different ways of mixing it. The simplest I find is to mix similar to how I did the Caucasian one. So I've got vermilion red and the brilliant orange, roughly equal parts. We'll just get that into a skin. That looks a bit red, but you have to dilute it so much. Let's just get that diluting. It does look a bit red at the moment. Well, actually it is too red, so just put some more orange in. Like that. And then you dilute it right down. And then I've got a test swatch here. Just careful not to put on my art masking fluid. It still looks a little bit too pinky to me. I might even just drop a bit of orange in there. Hopefully I haven't gone too far the other way. Now, just mix all that up. This isn't actually the colour yet. I'm not sure I'm going to have space in my palette to mix it, but I'm trying to get the Caucasian colour about right, because that's what we're going to add. Yeah, that's probably a bit better. So you'll see that was really quite pink. So if that was diluted a little bit more, maybe not that much. I think it will look a bit about right once it dries. So to mix the Caucasian skin colour, I use vermilion red and brilliant orange, and they're roughly a 50-50 mix, but you just have to play around. If it looks too pink, add a little bit more of the orange. If it looks too yellowy, add a bit more of the red. Now to make a Maori Pacific one, the easiest way I've found is using burnt umber, which is on its own, it is, I'll show you what it looks like. It's just a bit flat and washed out for a skin tone. So what I find is if we add the mix of vermilion red and brilliant orange to it, it really warms it up and brings it to life as, and starts to look like an actual skin tone. So let's just add some in here. Just rinse my brush off, bring some more of that in. And it's just a bit of a play around until you get it to a point you're happy. So I'm going to add a bit more of the burnt umber. You can also, if you like, you have to play around with the colour and look at it on your test swatch until you are happy with it. As the colour dries, it does change, it gets lighter. And you can add washes over the top. So if you do a colour and it's not quite right, you can either wash over a bit more of the warmth of the red and orange, or you can do a wash of the burnt umber just to deepen the colour. But you can also achieve some of this by other additional layers that aren't as thin as a wash. But skin tones take a bit of playing around with getting to the point where you're happy, but you can still adjust them on the paper, even if they're not quite where you want them. Once your masking fluid is fully dry, hopefully it is, we're going to do some wet on wet and some washes in the background. So the first thing to do, I might use a big brush to do this actually, is wet down your paper. So make sure you've got clean water for this, wet your brush, and then we're just going to wet all of the paper. Now when you're wetting it, you don't want the water pooling, but you also want to make sure that you have enough that it's wet. Just want to make sure you've got water on all parts of it pretty evenly. Cool. And once you're happy it's all wet and there's no massive puddles, but you've got some water on there, what we're going to do is start adding some of the pigment. I'm going to start, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use cyan blue, amethyst violet and indigo blue for the wet on wet. And around the stars I'm just going to put some cyan blue swooping around here. That's because this is the area that I want lightest. So I'm just putting it on. Just remember the colour will dry lighter than it looks now, but equally you can always do additional layers once. That is a bit light, but once the paint is fully dry, so we go, just drop some in, and then the amazing paper just mixes it for you. So we'll do that with the amethyst violet. So I'm just kind of creating some different colours into the galaxy. If you leave a little bit of a space, the wet on wet will help with the colours integrating and mixing. But we'll come back and do more layers, so don't worry too much. I'm just kind of softening that cyan blue edge a little bit. But it is only the first coat, so don't worry too much. And I'm going to do like a deeper, so this is indigo blue, and I'm just doing that around the outside because I want a really deep. This will need lots of layers. Now you can see here there's actually too much water on the paper at that point. It's pooling, and you can kind of see that the colour just sits there and doesn't move. But again, don't worry too much. We'll just get this layer of paint on while it's all wet, and then let it dry, and then we'll come back and do more work to get the, I mean, this is far too light for what we want, so we're going to build up layers of colour here. You want to work quite quickly with wet on wet. You don't want any of the paint areas that you're working on drying. If you do wet on wet and the paper or paint is partially dry and then you come in with more wet paint, it causes something called blooming. Basically the water picks up the pigment and it travels to areas that are drier, carries the pigment with it, and it creates watermarks. So what you want to do is work quite quickly, get down the sort of base colours, and again now you just have to be super patient and wait for it to dry. Once your first layer is fully dry, then we can come back in and start building up some more layers. Now if it's fully dry, you can add water again, just to do wet on wet again. Okay, then what I'm going to be doing is just trying to build up more colour intensity because it all looks a bit washed out. So just bringing some of this amethyst violet in. I just want things to look more vibrant, and we'll bring some more of the cyan blue. Coming back in with the indigo blue, and no, it's not even going to be dark enough. Hang on a second, I'm just going to get some more indigo blue. We'll use that pretty much straight. So straight indigo blue, and I'm just applying that around really the borders. Wet on wet's really cool because the paint pretty much does all the work for you. So it takes about a minute to get all that paint on, and then we'll need to wait for the paint to dry. So it's another process of just waiting now. Right, once that layer's dried, we're going to do the same process again, just building up the colour where you want it. So Do make sure your first layer is completely dry, and then I'm just going to apply a little bit of water. Each layer that I build up more, it's getting closer and closer to how I want it to look at the end, and I don't need the paint to travel as freely or as far, so I'm really just dampening the paper off so you get a soft edge to the colour. I'm not so worried about getting the paint to travel a huge amount at this point. This is more just building up the intensity of colour that you want. Yeah, so I'll just bring some purple in here. More. If you dab off all your water on a paper towel, it will lift some of the pigment off your picture if you're wanting to do that. But it's not too dry. I'm just going to come in with a bit more of a indigo blue into the deepest corners. I just want to get more change in tonal value, so I guess depth. That's most important to me, just around the corners and in this bottom section of the painting, which I think I'm going to need to let dry and come back and do. So we'll just let that dry again. It's a bit of a waiting process, the wet on wet, particularly when you're using a masking fluid and you can't hair dry it. So I guess make yourself a cup of tea and just let that dry, and we'll come back and maybe do a fraction more work, just a little bit more work on the wet and wet area. Okay, now that it's fully dry again, I'm just going to get it a bit darker around this base level and these edges here. There's a bit of a transition there. I just want to soften it a little bit. So I'm just going to get a damp brush, dab off some of the water, and just see if I can see if this will soften a little bit. Maybe not. So what I'm going to do actually is again get a big brush, just damp, and I'm just going to wet the whole thing down again. Now I'm not going to make it super wet because I don't actually want the paint travelling, and I don't want so much water that it dilutes the colour a lot as well. So I'm just putting just a little bit of water down. Going to, in here it's where it's going from purple to cyan blue, so I'm just bringing in the tiniest amount of amethyst violet. So yeah, I'm kind of being fussy at the moment now. So the indigo blue I'm literally putting on straight from the bottle because I want some really deep tones. And then I'm going to wash off my brush and dab off some of the water, and then I'm just going to go along the edge, and it just kind of softens that edge, and I might draw that in again, and I might even do that again. So I'm just cleaning my brush off, and then so clean your brush off, and then you get most of the water off on a paper towel, and then you kind of just brush along at the edge of where the paint is, and if you get a hard edge, then you just kind of come in a bit more, and it will encourage the paint just to slowly dilute and give you a really nice smooth transition. So just keep rinsing the brush off because you'll be picking up pigment when you do it, and again just dabbing off most of the water and just bring the line in, and that's it. Sorry, I just see a little bit in the corner here that I've missed. So just put a little bit in there. Yeah, I feel like I might come up a little bit higher here as well with the deep blue. Just a little bit more in there. So again, I'm rinsing off the brush, dabbing off most of the water, and then I'll just come back in here and just soften those lines off a little bit so the paint just travels. Yeah, and I'm happy with that. So now it's just a process of waiting for it to dry before we take off the masking fluid. It's dry. I like to use a rubber cement pickup to get masking fluid off, and we're just going to lift off all the masking fluid and then start painting the fairy. So you don't need a rubber cement pickup, you can just rub it with your finger to get it off, but I just find this a much easier, just easy way. It just grips hold of it and pulls it for you. So just kind of drag it just lightly over the surface and it will just grip hold. If you just rub your fingers over it, you'll be able to tell if there's any bits you've missed. The rubber, the masking fluid kind of well, it feels gummy. It has a totally different feel against your fingers. So even though I flicked it on with a brush and there's lots of tiny bits everywhere, you can tell really easily if you've got them all off or not just by running your finger over. You can see here that that I have a little gap, and I'm suspecting down here I have too, which is unfortunate because it means the colour has gone under the masking fluid in those places. But that's okay, I think. I'll just have a look at where it is and how it looks, and hopefully we can kind of get around it with how we paint those areas. I'm just feeling to see if I can feel any more bits of masking fluid on there, and just rub them off with my fingers if I do. Right, so yeah, that was my mistake. So when I was putting the art masking fluid on, I've obviously missed a few spots. Yeah, so the paint's come through. And anyway, right, what we'll do now is more wet on wet, and we'll get the wings painted of the fairy. So this time, rather than painting the whole thing, we're just literally going to paint the wings. I'm actually just going to start with the centre wing because the wings are overlapping each other, and I only want the paint to run within the within the one wing. So I'm just going to do the centre one first, and then once that dries I'll do the one above and one below. Right, and then we're going to drop some cyan blue. And I tend to just put the pigment down at the outer edge, and maybe in a little bit. And then washing off my brush, and I'm dabbing it on a paper towel. And then I'll just kind of encourage some blending and moving of the paint if it's not quite doing what I want it to do. I was also going to do little polka dots on the dress, so that needs some masking fluid put on to dry. These little bits where the paint's come through. This masking fluid was meant to be to preserve it being the natural, light paper colour, but seeing as it's got paint on it, I might come back with a white gouache and go over the white polka dots. It'll help disguise my mistake. Just get a little bit of magenta onto the shoes. And then the Indian yellow, I'll just get a little bit of that. It's literally just for that little centre dot of the flower, so it's the tiniest amount. That's that. And then what I'm going to do is just get a base layer on the skin. So I mixed this colour up before. It was burnt umber and then a bit of vermilion red and a bit of brilliant orange. So I'll just pop this super light base layer down, and I'm not doing any shading at this point, I'm just literally getting a coat on all over the skin. You want to start off super light, because you can always build up the colour, and you'll want to do that so that you can add shading too. So it's really hard to take colour off. It's much easier to add more, so it's better to go in too light and just have to add more layers than it is to come in too dark. Other shoes I've tried, so I'm just come back in with the indigo blue, and just a line around the shoe that I just want to improve a little bit. So that's going to dry, so I'm going to come in and wet this top wing and do the same technique. So I'm wetting the top wing down, and then I'll apply the cyan blue to the bit closest to the body and the magenta to the outer part of the wing. Just coming in and just putting a bit of shading onto the shoes. Light source. I'm doing it, you know, it's a glow in the sky, so I'm going to have the light source coming down this way, so the light's coming in on this angle. So I'll start building up shadows based on this. So be around the side of the face. So what I do is, you've got to work quite quickly, so you put the paint on, rinse your brush, dab off most of the water, and then you can come back along the edge and just place clean water, and what it does is the paint then bleeds into that space, which softens the edge of it up. Gives you kind of a more gentle transition. So again, we're going to have a shadow lower side here. Again, rinse off your brush, dab off most of the water, and then come along and soften the edge. Now, to do that, to soften the edge, the paint does still need to be wet. So I guess just do a little bit by a little bit. Like if you just do one arm, or even half the arm, like if that's all you could get done, you could just, because you need to come in with that damp while the paint that you've put down is still wet. No, I haven't done her neck, but I'm a bit reluctant to do it right now because that face is not quite dry. So I just want to wait for the face to fully dry, and then I'll come back and do a bit more work on the skin. I think I'll make the wand stick pink a bit. Coming back in and just adding a little bit more shading again into the shoe. I'm using the magenta. I haven't used any other colours, it's just magenta, and it's just less diluted with water to get the darker tone, and then I soften the edges off. Skin's feeling pretty good now, so I might just come in under this chin area. We'll just do a bit of a shadow here. And just build up a bit more shading in the face as well. Bit more work on the wing, although I'm pretty happy with it, so I'll just yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. We'll just do a little bit. Oh, good grief. Oh man, that dot hadn't dried yet, and I just rubbed my finger on it basically. Shoot, I was trying to decide how best to do this. I'm just going to take off the dots in this top half, just so I don't accidentally have some stuff on which I didn't expect, and then I'll reapply that masking fluid. Again, I'm just being impatient and trying to work around areas that are close together and not allowing time for things to dry, and when you do that then well, accidents happen. Right, let that dry second time lucky. So there's a lot of waiting for paint to dry when you're doing wet on wet and when you're working on a small piece, because it's so small you can't go and work on another area whilst it dries, so you kind of find that you just have to be super patient, which as you can see in this painting that I'm not doing so well at today. I'm tempted to do, I'm just finding the skin tone maybe not quite as warm as I'd like it, so I'm going to come in with a really light wash of the vermilion red and brilliant orange mix and just see if that kind of warms up the skin tone a little bit. Yeah, so hopefully that'll do, but it just doesn't look very, I don't know, the only way I can think to describe it is alive. Right, and now I'm going to come in and do the wet on wet on the centre wing, second layer. It's the only one I haven't done yet. So it's the same as before, just wet down the wing, only put in water where you want the paint to go. And I'll do a drop of the cyan blue near the hair and, you know, some magenta near the outer edge and let them blend themselves together. So the dress, I wanted to kind of do a pinky purple, so I'll just bring in some of the magenta and we'll do a base layer. In fact, I didn't even check the skin was dry, but yeah, it is thankfully, so we'll just do a base layer. I might just put like a little bit of yellow on every occasional star. Right, I'm just coming in now with the magenta and just putting down another coat. I'm going to try and work relatively quickly here because I want to actually do some wet on wet and drop some amethyst violet over it, just to back off how pink it is, just a little bit. I could have mixed the colour, but wet on wet's good, works for me. It means actually that I can use it kind of as a shading in the dress as well. So I'm going to just bring in some amethyst violet while it's still wet to the darker side of the dress, which is here because the light's coming in from up there, so just bring in a bit there and get a bit up here as well. Oops, that was not meant to be the one where I cleaned my brush, but it's okay. I'm going to repeat just to again build it up until I get the colour that I want, so bringing in the magenta again, working pretty quickly because I don't want it to all dry. Okay, and once it's dry, I'm pretty happy with that colour. We'll just come in again with the rubber cement pickup and take off. I haven't done perfect dots this time by any means. I'm rough on this painting actually, but unintentionally, but anyway. Again, this polka dot's gone a bit wonky, so I've obviously knocked it while it's wet. And you see the bit where I didn't have the masking fluid on probably before, but what we can do with that is some white gouache, and we can just paint around some of these spots if we want to define them a bit better. So you can kind of, if you make mistakes, you can fix some of them. Normally I wouldn't bother putting white gouache on, but normally I just use the masking fluid in most instances. But given I dropped paint on this, then it's quite handy to be able to go over it and just kind of touch those spots up. You know, the other areas don't really need it, but I'm putting a little bit around just to be kind of consistent with how they look, because it is a slightly different colour to the actual paper. And over here, where my masking fluid went a bit wonky, just try and decide what to do with that to fix it. I'm going to put some gouache just here on this one, and then I might actually come back with watercolour and paint over that other piece. Let's see how I go. Just let that dry. So while that's drying, let's get a little bit of a base colour on the hair, which is going to be black hair in this instance. So I'm diluting a lot, and I'm just going to put down a base layer. Which, when I'm doing a base layer, generally don't worry about doing any tonal variation or shading. I literally just pick a light tone of the colour, because it's going to be the lightest parts of the hair, and just put it on the whole hair area. Oh, while we're waiting for that to dry, I can do the little red bits on the cheeks, which is just the tiniest amount of ruby red. Dot on there like that, and we'll let it dry. Okay, that black's drying really fast, which is great. Come on and add some more. Like a range of tonal glows. So what I'm going to do is put a little bit on, and then I'm going to rinse my brush and dab off most of the paint, and then just sort of soften the edge. And I'm just going to keep doing this till I get, I'll keep doing layer and layer until I get to a colour that I'm happy with. To dry, I'm going to come in here, hopefully this is okay. I'm just going to try and get rid of this mark here. And each time I go in on this hair, I'm just adding a slightly, it's the same colour, so it's deep black, and each time it's just slightly less diluted. So thankfully, one of the bits where I splodged paint is under the hair, and the hair's dark, so we'll be able to largely cover that up. So I've made a lot of mistakes in this painting, but it's quite useful in a way really, so that you can see, you know, how you can approach kind of disguising some of them, I guess would be the right word. I'm going to come back in again with some more magenta and see if I can just patch that just a fraction more. So I'm putting the deep black on, and then I'm rinsing off my brush, and then dabbing off most of the water, and then coming back and just softening any edges that I feel are just a bit too intense or too harsh. Shadow under these flowers just to help them pop a bit, and then damp brush and coming back down, softening these edges hopefully while they're still wet. If they're not and they've dried a bit, you can wet down the paper and you can come back in with more watercolour. And I just want to get a bit more, I just want to get more depth in some of these areas, so I'm just coming in again with more deep black, just darkening it up in certain regions, dabbing off, rinsing the brush, dabbing off most of the water, and then again softening the edge. Then, once you're done, what we want to do is take off this tape. So, just get to lift a bit, Okay, and then what you do is you peel it off just really gently on a 45-degree-ish angle. I like to keep it like low down to the paper so you're not pulling up on the paper, because you don't want to accidentally tear your paper. But this is a delicate tape, so it's not like a super harsh tape, and it's quite easy to get off. And actually I've never damaged watercolor paper with using this tape. So just get rid of these. Again, I like to keep the tape low, about a 45-degree angle, and just slowly peel it off. And you can see with the tape you just get these really beautiful crisp edges, and it just looks fantastic. There you go. It's one fairy greeting card.